I don't want to be alone tonight. Those were the last words Ethan Walker expected to hear from the most powerful woman in the building. What if the person everyone admired, feared, and envied was secretly falling apart when no one was looking? This isn't just a story about a CEO. It's a story about quiet pain, unexpected kindness, and the second chances that arrive when we least expect them. The headquarters of Bennett Dynamics towered over downtown Chicago like a monument of glass and ambition. Even at 9:47 p.m., lights still glowed across dozens of floors. Most employees had gone home hours ago, but Ethan Walker was still there. He moved through the nearly empty hallways with a maintenance cart, checking equipment before heading home to his 9-year-old daughter. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The scent of fresh coffee lingered from a conference room someone had forgotten to clean. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled beneath a blanket of cold November clouds. Ethan glanced at his watch. Lily would already be asleep. He hated missing bedtime, but overtime shifts helped pay the bills. Being a single father meant making choices nobody applauded and sacrifices nobody noticed. He pushed his cart toward the executive floor. Usually, the entire level was deserted by this hour. The executives left early. Their assistants disappeared even earlier. The silence up there always felt different, heavier somehow, as if success itself had a sound. Ethan collected a stack of discarded files from a reception desk and turned toward the elevator lobby. Then he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind rattling against the windows. A faint sound, barely noticeable. But then it came again. A quiet sob. Ethan froze. The sound was coming from the CEO's private office. He frowned. Charlotte Bennett was known throughout the company as unstoppable. Employees described her with words like brilliant, disciplined, intimidating. Investors trusted her. Reporters admired her. Nobody ever described her as vulnerable. Ethan stood still for several seconds. Maybe he should leave. Maybe this was none of his business. He started to turn away. Then, another quiet cry echoed through the hallway. Something about it didn't sound dramatic. It sounded lonely. Ethan hesitated before walking slowly toward the office. The door was slightly open, just enough to reveal a sliver of warm light. "Ms. Bennett," he called gently. No answer. He knocked softly. The door drifted wider. And then he saw her. Charlotte Bennett was sitting on the floor beside her desk. Her expensive blazer had been tossed over a chair. Her shoes rested nearby. Her head was lowered. In her hands was an old photograph with blackened edges, as though part of it had been damaged years ago. For a moment, neither of them moved. Charlotte looked up. Her eyes widened. Ethan immediately stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." He expected anger, embarrassment, a sharp order to leave. Instead, Charlotte stared at him for several long seconds. The city lights reflected in tears she clearly hadn't wanted anyone to see. Then her shoulders sagged. The mask she wore every day seemed to disappear all at once. "Wait," she whispered. Ethan stopped. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of the city below. Charlotte looked down at the photograph in her hands, then back at him. Her voice trembled, almost too softly to hear. "I don't want to be alone tonight." Ethan remained where he was, one hand still resting on the edge of the door. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard her correctly. Charlotte Bennett, the woman whose decisions moved millions of dollars before breakfast, was asking a maintenance supervisor not to leave her alone. Neither of them spoke. The silence settled gently between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Ethan stepped inside and closed the door halfway behind him. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. Charlotte let out a shaky breath and gave a small nod. "Just for a few minutes." Ethan glanced around the office. It was larger than most apartments in the city, yet somehow it felt empty tonight. Awards lined the shelves. Frame magazine covers hung on the walls. Through the windows, Chicago stretched for miles beneath the dark sky. But none of those things seemed to matter. Charlotte looked down at the photograph in her hands. Her fingers tightened around its worn edges. "You can sit if you want," she said. Ethan pulled a chair closer but remained a respectful distance away. "Bad day?" he asked. Charlotte laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Bad year." The answer lingered in the air. Ethan did not press for details. He had learned long ago that people spoke more freely when they did not feel interrogated. Charlotte studied him for a moment. Most people would be asking questions right now. Ethan shrugged. Most people probably work on different floors. That earned the faintest smile. It appeared for only a second before disappearing again. She looked back at the photograph. Do you ever feel like everyone around you knows your name, but nobody actually knows you? Ethan leaned back slightly. More often than you would think. Charlotte seemed surprised by that. Really? Being a single father can do that, he replied. Most people see the responsibilities. They do not always see the person carrying them. For the first time, Charlotte looked directly at him. Not at his work badge. Not at his uniform. At him. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she slowly turned the photograph around. Ethan hesitated before looking. The image showed a smiling family standing beside a lake on a summer afternoon. A younger Charlotte stood between an older man and woman. The right side of the photograph was damaged, darkened by age and heat. My favorite picture, she whispered. My father kept it on his desk for years. Ethan recognized the sadness immediately. It was the kind that settled deep and stayed there. He passed away? Charlotte nodded. 3 months ago. Her voice cracked. And tomorrow morning I have to stand in front of the board and finalize the sale of the company he spent his entire life building. Ethan looked at the photograph again. Suddenly the office felt even quieter. That sounds difficult. Charlotte laughed bitterly. Difficult is when your flight gets canceled. This feels like losing him all over again. The words escaped before she could stop them. She lowered her head and wiped at her eyes. Ethan said nothing. He simply sat there. No advice. No speeches. No empty promises. Just presence. Minutes passed. Then Charlotte spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. There is something else. Ethan waited. Charlotte stared out at the city lights and swallowed hard. I was going to go home tonight. She paused. But I cannot bear the thought of walking into that empty penthouse by myself. Ethan looked toward the dark windows overlooking the city. Thousands of lights stretched across the skyline, yet he understood exactly what she meant. Loneliness did not care how large a home was or how successful a person appeared. Sometimes it grew louder in the quietest rooms. Charlotte rested the photograph on her lap and stared at the floor. I know how ridiculous this sounds, she said softly. The board thinks I am fearless. The media thinks I have everything figured out. Half the city probably thinks I spend my evenings celebrating deals and making plans. She let out a small laugh. The truth is I have never felt more lost. Ethan folded his hands. It does not sound ridiculous. Charlotte glanced up. No. He thought about the empty seat at his dinner table after his wife passed away. He thought about nights spent pretending to be strong for Lily while feeling anything but strong. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is walking into a quiet room when there is nobody waiting for you. Charlotte lowered her eyes. For a moment, she looked less like a chief executive and more like someone carrying a weight she could no longer hide. The office grew still again. The heating system hummed softly through the ceiling vents. Somewhere far below, a siren echoed through the city before fading into the distance. Then Charlotte took a slow breath. I have a strange question. Ethan offered a small smile. Tonight seems to be full of those. To his surprise, she smiled back. It was brief, but genuine. Your daughter, she said. Lily, right? Ethan nodded. You mentioned her once during the holiday toy drive. That sounds like something I would do. Charlotte looked toward the photograph again. Is she waiting for you at home? She is probably asleep by now. Does she still leave notes on your refrigerator? Ethan blinked. How do you know about that? Charlotte shrugged lightly. People talk. Not in a bad way. They say your daughter leaves drawings and little messages so you see them before work. Ethan chuckled. That sounds exactly like Lily. The memory softened his face. Charlotte noticed immediately. There was a warmth there she rarely saw in boardrooms or executive meetings. You smiled, she said quietly. Most people smile when they talk about someone they love. Ethan replied. Charlotte looked away. Something about that answer seemed to affect her more than she expected. She stared out at the lights beyond the glass. I miss that, she admitted. Having people around who care about the person instead of the title. Ethan did not answer right away. He simply listened. That alone seemed to help. Finally, Charlotte turned back toward him. Her expression was hesitant now, almost nervous. It was a look nobody in the company would have believed possible. Would you think I was completely crazy if I asked you something? Ethan shook his head. After tonight, probably not. Charlotte swallowed hard. Then she asked the question that had been sitting on her heart all evening. Would you and Lily have dinner with me tomorrow night? For a second, Ethan wondered whether he had misheard her. Out of all the things he expected from Charlotte Bennett, an invitation to dinner was not one of them. He blinked once. Dinner. Charlotte immediately looked embarrassed. See? I knew it sounded strange. She stood and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The confident executive who commanded boardrooms worth billions of dollars seemed to vanish again. Forget I asked. I did not say no. Charlotte paused. You did not say yes either. Ethan could not help smiling. That is because I am trying to understand how I explain to my daughter that the CEO of my company wants to have dinner with us. To his surprise, Charlotte laughed. It was small and quiet, but real. The tension in the room eased slightly. When you put it that way, it sounds even stranger. A little. She looked down at the photograph and nodded slowly. I suppose it does. The city lights shimmered behind her. For the first time all evening, Ethan noticed how exhausted she looked. Not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent years carrying responsibilities that never became lighter. Why us? He asked gently. Charlotte stared at the picture for several seconds before answering. Because when I was growing up, dinner meant something. Her voice softened. No phones. No meetings. No expectations. Just family. Ethan listened quietly. After my mother passed away, my father tried to keep that tradition alive. Every Sunday. Every holiday. No matter how busy things became. She swallowed. Now he is gone too. The office fell silent again. I have spent the last 3 months surrounded by people, Charlotte continued. Lawyers. Consultants. Investors. Reporters. Yet somehow I have never felt more alone. Ethan understood that kind of loneliness. It was not the absence of people. It was the absence of connection. Charlotte looked at him carefully. Then tonight you talked about Lily. A faint smile touched her face. The way your face changed when you mentioned her. Ethan looked away for a moment. She is a good kid. I believe that. Charlotte's expression grew thoughtful. I think I just want to remember what a normal dinner feels like. Ethan considered her words. There was no manipulation in them. No hidden agenda. No executive strategy. Just honesty. Rare, fragile honesty. Finally he nodded. All right. Charlotte looked up. Really? Really? Relief crossed her face so quickly she could not hide it. Thank you. Ethan stood from the chair. One condition. She tilted her head. What is that? No fancy restaurant. Charlotte looked genuinely confused. Why? Because if you take Lily somewhere with crystal chandeliers and 12 forks at every place setting, she will spend the entire night worrying about using the wrong spoon. For a moment Charlotte simply stared at him. Then she laughed harder than she had all evening. The sound echoed softly through the office. Warm. Human. Unscripted. When the laughter faded, her eyes seemed brighter somehow. Fair enough, she said. No chandeliers. Ethan picked up his jacket. Good. He started toward the door. Behind him Charlotte looked down at the old photograph once more. But this time she was not crying. And as Ethan stepped into the hallway, he did not know it yet, but tomorrow night would begin changing both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. The next evening arrived with a light snowfall drifting across the Chicago streets like scattered pieces of silver. Ethan parked his aging pickup outside a small family restaurant on the north side of the city. It was the kind of place with warm yellow lights in the windows, handwritten specials on a chalkboard, and booths that had witnessed thousands of ordinary conversations. Exactly the sort of place Lily loved. You still have not told me why we are meeting your boss, Lily said from the passenger seat. Ethan smiled. Because she could use some company. Lily considered that answer carefully. Is she sad? Ethan paused. Children had a way of seeing straight through complicated explanations. A little. Lily nodded as though that made perfect sense. Then we should be nice to her. Inside the restaurant, Charlotte was already waiting. She stood when she saw them approach, and for a moment Ethan barely recognized her. Gone was the tailored business suit. Gone was the polished executive image. Tonight, she wore a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. Her hair rested loosely on her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, more relaxed, more human. Hi, Lily said immediately. Hi, Charlotte replied, smiling. I am Charlotte. Lily shook her hand with complete seriousness. I am Lily. My dad says you are important. Charlotte glanced at Ethan. Did he? Yes. Lily climbed into the booth. But I think everybody is important. For a second Charlotte simply stared at her. Then something softened behind her eyes. That is a pretty good way to look at the world. Dinner began awkwardly enough. Charlotte seemed unsure how to act around a child. Lily solved that problem within 5 minutes. She talked about school, her science project, her favorite books, and the stray orange cat that occasionally appeared on their apartment steps. Ethan mostly listened while Charlotte slowly relaxed. The more Lily talked, the more Charlotte smiled. Soon she was asking questions. Real questions. Not polite conversation. Curious conversation. The kind people have when they genuinely care about the answers. Halfway through dinner, Lily pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. "Do you want to see my drawing?" Charlotte nodded. Lily unfolded it across the table. It showed a small house beneath a bright sky. 3 stick figures stood in front of it. "That is me and Dad," Lily explained. Then she pointed at the 3rd figure. "That is Mom." Ethan felt a quiet stillness settle over the table. Lily rarely talked about her mother with strangers. Charlotte studied the drawing carefully. "She looks happy," Charlotte said. Lily smiled. She was. Charlotte looked at the picture a moment longer. When she finally looked up, there was moisture in her eyes she tried hard to hide. But this time the sadness was different. Softer, gentler, like a wound beginning to heal instead of one being reopened. As the evening continued, laughter replaced silence. Stories replaced loneliness. And for the first time in many months, Charlotte Bennett stopped feeling like the woman who had lost everything and started feeling like someone who might still have a future waiting for her. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm none of them had expected. Every Thursday evening, Charlotte joined Ethan and Lily for dinner somewhere ordinary. Sometimes it was a neighborhood diner. Sometimes it was a small pizza place with checkered tablecloths. Once it was a tiny pancake restaurant where Lily convinced Charlotte to try chocolate chip pancakes for dinner. Each time Charlotte arrived looking a little less burdened than before. She laughed more, smiled more, and for a few precious hours she stopped being the woman responsible for thousands of employees and became simply Charlotte. But not everyone viewed the change with the same warmth. One Monday morning, whispers began circulating through the executive floor. At first they were harmless observations. The CEO seemed happier lately. The CEO had been leaving the office earlier. The CEO had been spotted having coffee with someone from facilities. By the end of the week, the rumors had grown sharper. In large companies, stories had a way of expanding faster than truth. Ethan noticed the difference almost immediately. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. People glanced at him in elevators. A few employees who had always been friendly suddenly seemed distant. He ignored it. He had spent too many years raising a daughter alone to worry about gossip. But Charlotte noticed it too. During a board meeting on a gray Wednesday afternoon, one of the directors cleared his throat before speaking. "There have been concerns raised regarding appearances." Charlotte looked up from a financial report. "Appearances? Your relationship with an employee." The room became very still. Charlotte's expression did not change. "What relationship?" Another director folded his hands. "The maintenance supervisor. Ethan Walker." The name hung in the air. Several executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Charlotte slowly closed the folder in front of her. "Mr. Walker is an employee. That is not what people are saying." Charlotte stared at him for several seconds. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then perhaps people should spend less time inventing stories and more time doing their jobs. Nobody responded. Yet the concern remained. Later that afternoon, Charlotte stood alone in her office, staring at the skyline. The conversation bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Not because it threatened her reputation, because it threatened something she had come to value. Real friendship, real kindness, real connection, things money could never purchase. Meanwhile, downstairs, Ethan was replacing a lighting fixture when his supervisor approached. "Got a minute?" Ethan climbed down from the ladder. "Sure." The older man looked uncomfortable. "Corporate is asking questions." Ethan already knew. "About me?" His supervisor nodded. "You should be careful." Ethan thanked him and returned to work, but the warning stayed with him all afternoon. By evening, he sat alone in his apartment after Lily had gone to bed. A light snow tapped softly against the windows. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. Ethan stared at the city lights outside and thought about Charlotte. He thought about the peace she had slowly begun to rediscover. Then he thought about the board, the rumors, and the damage those rumors could cause. For the first time since that night in her office, a difficult idea entered his mind. If protecting Charlotte meant stepping away from her life, he might eventually have to do exactly that. The following Thursday arrived colder than usual. A sharp wind swept between the downtown buildings, carrying flurries of snow across the sidewalks. Ethan spent most of the day working in silence. The rumors had not disappeared. If anything, They had become more persistent. He heard fragments of conversations in break rooms. He noticed curious looks from people who had never paid attention to him before. None of it bothered him personally. What bothered him was knowing Charlotte was being forced to answer questions she never should have faced in the first place. By late afternoon, Ethan had made his decision. It was not an easy one, but being a father had taught him something important. Sometimes doing the right thing felt exactly like losing. That evening, he sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment while Lily worked on homework nearby. A yellow lamp cast a warm glow across the room. The scent of tomato soup lingered in the air. It was an ordinary moment, the kind of moment Ethan treasured. Lily looked up from her notebook. "Are we having dinner with Charlotte tonight?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Not tonight." Lily frowned. "Why not?" He searched for the right words. Sometimes adults have complicated problems. Lily thought about that. Is Charlotte one of the problems? Ethan almost laughed. No, she is not the problem. Then what is? Children always ask the hardest questions. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. People making assumptions about things they do not understand. Lily nodded slowly, though he could tell she only understood part of it. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan sat alone and began writing a letter. The paper remained blank for several minutes before the words finally came. He wrote about gratitude. He wrote about friendship. He wrote about respect. Most of all, he wrote about dignity. He never mentioned sacrifice. He never mentioned pain. Some things did not need to be said aloud. The next morning, he arrived at Bennett Dynamics before sunrise. The building was quiet. The marble lobby reflected the pale glow of winter dawn. Ethan placed an envelope inside a drawer of Charlotte's desk while her office was still empty. Then he walked downstairs and met with Human Resources. By 9 o'clock, his resignation was official. No dramatic speeches. No explanations. Just a signature and a handshake. By noon, he was gone. Charlotte learned about it 3 hours later. She had just finished a meeting with investors when her assistant entered looking unusually nervous. "There is something you should know." Charlotte glanced up from her paperwork. "What is it?" The assistant hesitated. "Ethan Walker resigned this morning." The room suddenly felt very still. Charlotte lowered the document in her hands. "What?" He submitted everything before lunch. For a moment, she simply stared. Then she stood so quickly her chair rolled backward. "Why?" The assistant shook her head. He did not say. Charlotte was already moving toward the door. But by the time she reached the maintenance office, Ethan was gone. His locker was empty. His tools were gone. The space where he had spent years quietly doing his job looked untouched, as though he had never been there at all. And for the first time since losing her father, Charlotte felt that same hollow ache opening inside her chest once again. Charlotte stood alone in the maintenance office long after everyone else had returned to work. The empty locker remained open in front of her. A few forgotten screws sat in a small tray. A faded maintenance schedule still hung on the wall. Nothing important. Nothing valuable. Yet the absence of one quiet man seemed to fill the entire room. Slowly she returned to her office. The city beyond her windows looked the same as it always had. Traffic flowed below. Construction cranes stretched across the skyline. Meetings continued. Emails arrived every few seconds. But something felt different now. Something important had slipped away. Late that afternoon, Charlotte finally remembered the envelope. Her assistant had found it inside her desk drawer and placed it neatly beside her computer. She stared at it for several seconds before opening it. Ethan's handwriting was simple and steady. "Charlotte, if you are reading this, then I have already left. I know you will probably be upset, and I am sorry for that. But some things matter more than keeping a job. Your father spent his life building a company people respected. You deserve the freedom to lead it without defending friendships that should never have become public debate. Please do not waste energy being angry with anyone. Most people simply do not understand what they cannot see. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in places where people least expect it. Thank you for every conversation. Thank you for every laugh Lily brought into your life. Most of all, thank you for being yourself when nobody else was looking. You once told me you felt alone. The truth is you are stronger than you realize. You do not need a title to have value. You do not need a company to deserve love. And one day I hope you believe that as much as everyone else does." Ethan. By the time she finished reading, tears blurred the page. Not because he had left, because she finally understood why. He had never wanted anything from her. Not influence. Not money. Not recognition. He had protected her reputation at the cost of his own future. The realization struck harder than any boardroom confrontation ever could. For several minutes, she sat motionless. Then another thought appeared. If Ethan had been willing to sacrifice so much for her, how much had she truly known about him? Charlotte pressed a button on her desk phone. "Can you send me the personnel records for Ethan Walker?" Within an hour, she had a stack of files. What she discovered left her speechless. Over the years, Ethan had quietly donated vacation days to struggling employees. He had organized holiday gift drives without putting his name on them. He had repaired a receptionist's car after work and refused payment. He had paid for winter coats for 2 children whose parents worked in the warehouse. No announcements, no publicity, no credit, just quiet acts of grace scattered throughout the company like invisible footprints. Charlotte leaned back in her chair and stared at the city beyond the glass. The board had spent weeks questioning his intentions. Yet the only person in the building who had never asked for anything was the man they had pushed away. And for the first time, Charlotte Bennett knew exactly what she had to do next. 3 days later, Charlotte stood in front of the Bennett Dynamics board of directors with a calm expression and a certainty she had not felt in months. The conference room overlooked Lake Michigan. Morning sunlight reflected off the water, filling the room with pale winter light. Around the table sat investors, executives, and advisors who had spent weeks questioning decisions they barely understood. Charlotte listened until everyone had finished speaking. Then she stood. "Before we continue," she said, "there is something I need to address." The room fell silent. Charlotte placed a folder on the table. Inside were records of every quiet act of generosity Ethan had performed during his years with the company. Vacation donations, employee assistance, anonymous support for struggling families. Countless moments of grace nobody had noticed because he never wanted recognition. One by one, the directors turned the pages. The silence grew heavier with every document. "You questioned his intentions," Charlotte said calmly. "The truth is that he was one of the most decent people this company has ever employed." Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. For the first time, the room had nothing to say. Later that afternoon, Charlotte left the city and drove north through quiet neighborhoods dusted with fresh snow. She had spent 2 days searching for Ethan. Finally, a former co-worker had mentioned a community youth basketball league where Lily sometimes played on weekends. The game was already underway when Charlotte arrived. The small gymnasium smelled faintly of polished wood and popcorn. Parents filled the bleachers. Children laughed. Sneakers squeaked across the court. It was ordinary, beautifully ordinary. Charlotte spotted Ethan sitting near the front row. He looked exactly the same. Simple jacket, calm posture, quiet presence. Yet seeing him again made her heart feel lighter than it had in weeks. Lily noticed Charlotte first. Her face brightened immediately. "Charlotte," she shouted, waving enthusiastically. Ethan turned. For a brief moment, surprise crossed his face. Then concern. Then relief. Charlotte walked down the bleachers toward him. Neither spoke at first. The game continued around them. The crowd cheered. Life moved forward. Yet somehow the world felt very still. "You found me," Ethan said softly. Charlotte nodded. "You made that difficult." A faint smile appeared on his face. "That was not my intention." "Then what was?" Ethan looked toward the court where Lily was laughing with her teammates. "Protecting something important." Charlotte lowered her eyes briefly. "You should have let me decide what was important." Ethan did not answer. The truth was written across his face. He would make the same sacrifice again if it meant protecting her. That was exactly why she had come. Charlotte took a slow breath. "The first night in my office," she said quietly, "I asked you to stay because I did not want to be alone." Ethan listened carefully. The sounds of the game faded into the background. Charlotte's eyes glistened. "Today I am asking for a different reason." Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not look away. "Stay because you matter." Ethan looked at her for several long seconds. Then Lily ran over from the court during a timeout and wrapped her arms around both of them without warning. The 3 of them laughed. Around them, parents continued cheering and children continued playing. Yet something remarkable happened. The worries, the titles, the rumors, and the losses seemed to disappear. In their place was something simpler. Respect, kindness, family. And as sunlight streamed through the high gym windows, Charlotte realized the greatest success of her life would never appear on a balance sheet. It was finding people who saw her not as a CEO, but as a person worthy of love, grace, and a second chance. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in a very long while, none of them were facing it alone.